Fox News alert, a hearing set to begin any minute now over President Trump's order on immigration. I'm Bill Hemmer, in tonight for Bret Baier. San Francisco is the venue, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The rules are simple. Both sides are given 30 minutes to argue, and then a decision by a three-judge panel might come later tonight or later this week. We have Team Fox coverage of Anna Napolitano in New York on the merits of this case. Dan Springer in Seattle with the plaintiff's side of the story. But we begin with Chief White House correspondent John Roberts and how the Trump administration is making its case tonight. And John, good evening to you.
Bill, good evening to you. Tonight's hearing will not be to determine the constitutionality of the president's extreme vetting program. What's at stake tonight is whether the president can keep that program in effect while the constitutional case goes forward. Talking law and order with members of a sheriff's association this morning, President Trump expressed frustration that he's in a legal battle at all.
I actually can't believe that we're having to fight to protect the security in a court system, to protect the security of our nation. I can't even believe it. And a lot of people agree with us, believe me.
A career attorney for the Justice Department will argue that there is no fight over the president's power to address national security, that he has, quote, expressed statutory authority to suspend entry of any class of aliens to protect the national interest. That authority, the DOJ insists, derives from the 1952 Immigration and Nationality Act, which states, whenever the president finds that the entry of any aliens or of any class of aliens into the United States would be detrimental to the interest of the United States, he may, by proclamation and for such period as he shall deem necessary, suspend the entry of all aliens or any class of aliens as immigrants or non-immigrants, or impose on the entry of aliens any restrictions he may deem to be appropriate. While the law was crafted at the height of the Cold War, Homeland Security Secretary John Kelly today said its application is just as relevant now. And he fell on his sword in front of Congress, apologizing for not briefing them before the extreme vetting program was rolled out.
In retrospect, I should have, this is all on me, by the way, I should have delayed it just a bit so that I could talk to members of Congress, particularly the leadership of committees like this, to prepare them for what was coming.
Three other points the White House will make to the court: that the ban does not target solely Muslims, it does not bar legal permanent residents, and that Washington State and Minnesota have no standing to bring the case on behalf of residents. What the White House wouldn't say today is what the president will do if the Ninth Circuit doesn't reinstate the immigration ban.
If he does not prevail at the Ninth Circuit, will he take this to the
I'm not going to get it. Let's see where it goes first. I think our goal right now is to get to a point we can argue it on the merits. We feel confident, based on how the court has reacted in Massachusetts, that we're going to be good on the merits.
The president today indicated he's in it to win it.
We're going to take it through the system. It's very important. It's very important for the country, regardless of me or whoever succeeds at a later date. I mean, we have to have security in our country.
In the middle of all of this, the White House stepped on its message a bit, releasing a list of 78 terror attacks it claimed went underreported by the media. It's true that many of the cases did not become headlines, and some were played down by the Obama administration. But the list also included attacks like Orlando, San Bernardino, Paris, Nice, and others, which, as you'll know from firsthand experience, Bill, received saturation coverage for days.
Thank you, John. Good to see you tonight there on the North Lawn of the White House. Let's take a closer look right now at the argument. The states challenging the White House do not want the travel ban to be reinstated. Dan Springer has that part of the story tonight from Seattle.
With Amazon in a hiring frenzy and tech giant Microsoft here, the Puget Sound relies as heavily on skilled foreign workers as any region. In filing its lawsuit against President Trump's temporary travel ban from 7 countries with majority Muslim populations, the state of Washington cited its impact on companies and the economy.
The president is not adhering to the Constitution when it comes to his executive action. It's my responsibility as Attorney General to defend the rule of law.
Expedia, the world's largest online travel company, which is based in Seattle, filed a declaration opposing the executive order. It claims 1,000 passport holders from the 7 affected countries currently have flights booked to and from the U.S. The company wrote, Expedia believes that the executive order jeopardizes its corporate mission and could have a detrimental impact on its business and employees, as well as the broader U.S. and global travel and tourism industry. Amazon also joined the lawsuit, stating it has 49 employees born in one of the banned countries, as well as 7 people who are up for jobs. The legal challenge was filed just before the Trump administration clarified that legal permanent residents are not restricted.
The order wasn't clear from the very beginning. The order appeared to apply to those with green cards, people who have legal residency in the United States. They do have some constitutional rights.
Washington's other argument on why it has standing has to do with its public universities, which courts have ruled are extensions of the state. The University of Washington has 95 students from affected countries, while Washington State University has 135.
Lost tax revenue, harms to our state universities in terms of lost, wasted money that was spent sponsoring people to come here to teach and perform research.
In its latest brief, Washington's lawyers say restoring the Trump ban would create more chaos, just as travel has resumed. But critics of the lawsuit say it's all about politics and point to shrill statements from the Democratic governor.
In American history, we have never needed checks and balances like we have needed it today.
The state of Minnesota signed on to Washington's lawsuit, and the state of Oregon is attempting to do the same. Oral arguments just began a few moments ago, and they are being conducted over the phone because all 3 judges are in their chambers in different parts of the West. According to the spokesman for the Ninth Circuit Court, a ruling is not expected today, but most likely later this week. Bill?
Dan, thank you for that. Dan Springer's in Seattle. As Dan mentioned there, the government goes first. The arguments are now underway. They get 30 minutes per side. And just to give you a sense how this is being conducted by way of telephone, just drop in and listen to this for a few seconds here.
It has to do with the assessment of risk that the president made in balancing our interest in welcoming people into this country with our interest in making sure our procedures are secure so that the risk of terrorism is acceptable.
Wow, there is the headline on behalf of the administration when it comes to national security. So while that continues, we'll monitor it and we'll bring you headlines when we get them. And as we await more on that, let's talk about the merits of the case and the judges involved. Andrew Napolitano, our Fox News senior judicial analyst, is with me now. And Judge, good to see you tonight and good evening to you.
Same to you.
Yeah, a fundamental question here to be decided. Do the states have the right to bring a case, correct or not?
Yes, that's the threshold issue. Lawyers and judges call it standing, because the Constitution doesn't permit anybody to sue the government just because they disagree with what the government's done. The person has to show that they were actually, or it was actually, harmed by what the government did. So when Dan Springer quite properly and now summarizes the arguments of the state of Washington that it's suing in behalf of corporations that were harmed, the response is, well, why aren't these corporations the plaintiffs in the case? If the court finds there is no standing, that the state of Washington, the state of Minnesota do not have standing to bring the suit, it's over. The executive order is back in force. Okay. If the court finds that there is standing, they then have to go to the next issue.
And part of that issue would be, did the judge in the state of Washington act within his right to issue this temporary restraining order, Judge, correct?
Yes. Temporary restraining orders are rarely overturned on appeal. But the government's argument here, the federal government's argument here, the president's argument here is that they were given very little opportunity at the initial hearing because the Department of Justice lawyers were new, the administration is new, the proceeding only took 15 minutes, there were very few papers filed, and there should have been a far more thorough analysis by this trial judge before he enjoined the President of the United States of America from protecting the United States of America at every airport in the United States of America.
Well, I'm looking at 43 cases brought forward, 17 state attorneys general, half a dozen labor and civil rights groups. If all of those are still out there, outside of the case we're watching right now, how is that resolved, Judge?
That's a great question, Bill. We are focusing tonight just on one of those cases. Chief Justice John Roberts has the authority, and he's done this in the past, to take all the 43 cases and assign them to one judge. So they're tried at one time in one place before one judge, rather than having 43 or 44 or 45 trials that are essentially attempting to litigate the same issues. If this case survives tonight, I expect that all those cases will be tried at one time and in one place, not necessarily before this judge in Seattle. Sometimes they will pick someone in the center of the country because people are going to have to do a lot of traveling to get there.
Well, quickly, I'm seeing a judge assigned by an appointee on behalf of President Obama, an appointee on behalf of George Bush 43rd, and an appointee on behalf of President Jimmy Carter. So those are the three hearing this argument here. I initially asked you about the merits. What do you believe the result will be if it's tonight or later in the week? What's the decision, Judge?
I think the panel of judges tonight, this is just my prediction for which you've kindly asked, is that the plaintiffs do not have standing. The two states in this case cannot bring a case in behalf of others. Only the others who were actually harmed can bring the case.
Okay. Judge, thank you. We're watching and waiting, and we're listening along with you. Andrew Napolitano, thank you, sir. In New York there tonight, the other big story tonight here happened on Capitol Hill behind me. The Senate has confirmed President Trump's choice to run the Department of Education, but it took a never-before tie-breaking vote from the vice president to get this nominee across the finish line. Chief Congressional Correspondent Mike Emanuel live on the Hill tonight. Mike, good evening to you. What happened?
Bill, good evening. Betsy DeVos has just been sworn in as the new Education Secretary after Vice President Mike Pence made history by being the deciding vote.
On this vote, the yeas are 50, the nays are 50. The Senate being equally divided, the Vice President votes in the affirmative and the nomination is confirmed.
Despite two Republicans defecting, Maine's Susan Collins and Alaska's Lisa Murkowski, DeVos is now going to be part of the Trump cabinet, even though she was a target of Democrats, the teachers union, and the education establishment from the very beginning.
It's not Democrats who are bitter about the election. It's the American people who are bitter about the nomination of Betsy DeVos, and that's why millions and millions of calls, almost unprecedented on a cabinet nomination, have poured into this Capitol.
Democrats spent about 24 hours on the floor trying to pressure one more Republican to reject DeVos.
Is this the best of the best? Is this a knowledgeable candidate who understands the federal law? Is this a candidate who comes to us without conflicts of interest?
Key Republicans defended DeVos, noting President Trump didn't want someone from the education establishment.
Would you be surprised that a Republican president would be for charter schools? Are you really surprised that a Republican president has appointed an education secretary who wants to give low-income children more choices of schools?
Senator Jeff Sessions' nomination for Attorney General also passed a procedural hurdle, 52-47, setting up a final confirmation vote likely tomorrow evening if Democrats insist on running out the clock again. Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn said Democrats can stall, but the president will eventually have his cabinet.
They know we're going to be successful. So stunts like staying up all night and making speeches, I'm not sure who they're trying to impress other than their dysfunctional base.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell predicted, quote, dysfunction fatigue will eventually set in if Democrats insist on burning 30 hours for each cabinet secretary, particularly since the remaining three who are getting votes this week are all expected to be confirmed. Bill?
All right, Mike, thank you. Mike Emanuel there on the Hill here in Washington. President Trump's choice for labor secretary now admits he employed a housekeeper who was illegal. Fast food CEO Andrew Puzder says he fired the woman as soon as he found out, then offered to help getting her legal status. His confirmation hearing, like some others, has been postponed several times here in Washington. Stocks were up today. The Dow finished ahead 38 points. S&P 500 little changed, up about half a point, and the Nasdaq jumped 11 points in trading today. From overseas now, Amnesty International saying that military police in Syria hanged as many as 13,000 people between the years 2011 and 2015. It also says there is no reason to believe that practice has stopped. The report suggesting the executions take place after a 1 to 2 minute sham trial and are authorized by the highest levels of the Syrian government. No comment from that government on this report tonight. A suicide bomber, meanwhile, striking Afghanistan's Supreme Court today. At least 19 are dead, 41 wounded, 10 of them said to be in critical condition. The attacker was on foot, targeted a side door as people were exiting that building. There has been no claim of responsibility, but the attack bears the hallmarks of the Taliban there in Kabul. A top Palestinian official saying that Israeli legislation that legalizes thousands of West Bank settlements is putting the final nail in the coffin of a two-state solution, rather. Correspondent Connor Powell now has the latest tonight in Jerusalem.
After months of debate, Israel's parliament approved a controversial new law that retroactively legalized almost 4,000 illegal Israeli homes built on privately owned Palestinian land. Israel's conservative settler community, which calls the West Bank by its biblical name, Judea and Samaria, and believes the land is rightfully theirs, praised the move.
It is a great day for the entire Judea and Samaria. All settlers should celebrate.
Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu initially opposed the legislation, arguing Israel might face severe international repercussions, but he later retreated. Israel's Attorney General has said he will not defend the bill before the Supreme Court, and many others in Israel's legal community believe the bill is unconstitutional.
It's a violation of the right to property. It's a violation of the prohibition on discrimination.
There are more than 600,000 Israelis living across the West Bank, with 130 separate Jewish settlements dispersed all over territory Palestinians someday hope would be part of their future state. The international community, including multiple U.S. administrations, have long opposed Israel's settlement enterprise. In December, the United Nations Security Council passed a resolution condemning Israel, saying settlements are an obstacle to peace, a position Israel's government disputes. Today, Palestinians condemn the new law.
It's a theft. It's looting Palestinian land. It is putting the last nail on the coffin of the two-state solution.
The Trump administration hasn't taken a position on the new legislation, but the White House did recently release a statement that said, in part, new settlements or the expansion of current settlements may not be helpful to achieving peace. Bill?
Connor, thank you. Connor Powell reporting in Jerusalem tonight. This is a Fox News Alert now, recapping our top story tonight. Attorneys for the Department of Justice right now trying to convince a federal appeals court that President Trump has the authority to issue his executive order on immigration. Now, that order is currently suspended. The opposition claiming the president exceeded his authority, and there was a lot of opposition on that end. Arguments are being made by telephone. They sound something like this from the government side just a moment ago.
This judgment was well within the president's power as delegated to him by Congress, and it is constitutional, as the court in Boston in the Halal Kalam recently held. Under Section 212F, Congress has expressly authorized the president to suspend entry of classes of aliens when it is necessary or when otherwise it would be detrimental to the interests of the United States.
So we will keep listening, and we'll let you know the headlines when we get them. We'll let you know what's happening, and we'll talk about that with our extended panel in a moment here this evening. In the meantime, the head of the Homeland Security Department saying that he thinks the immigration order will be upheld and the southern wall will be built. Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge reports tonight on John Kelly's first public appearance before lawmakers in his brand new job.
The largest opening in the most uncontrolled part of our border is the southwest border.
In his first congressional testimony as Secretary, Homeland Security Chief John Kelly did not back away from the administration's commitment to the wall and the travel ban.
Americans must feel safe to walk down the street, go to the mall, or to a nightclub. Anywhere and any time. Fear must not become the status quo.
Lawmakers pressed Kelly on whether his own Customs and Border Patrol agents think a physical wall is necessary.
Has somebody at CBP told you that we need a 2,000-mile wall built along that border?
Maybe there are some places that are too rugged to put a wall, and we cover that with patrolling in technology.
While taking some blame for the travel ban rollout, Kelly said the 7 mostly Muslim nations are either not cooperating or can't provide reliable intelligence.
For the last number of years, the vetting is at best loose, and the amount of information, you take some of these countries we're talking about that are in really state of failed states.
The pause will give us time to enhance security checks to stop terrorists
from using our immigration system as a Trojan horse.
Republicans and Democrats push Kelly for evidence terrorists have slipped into the U.S. as refugees.
You don't have any proof at this point?
Not until the boom.
Not until what?
Not until they act and blow something up or go into a mall and kill people. So we won't know until then.
There's a new sheriff in town. I hear there's so
At the White House, President Trump reinforced his message by hosting county sheriffs, many from border states.
Let me tell you the difference of 6 months. I sat in this room, in this chair, and I was pleading, I was begging for help.
It was 180 degrees from what we heard from the previous administration.
And we're seeing a big difference.
We're very proud to have you as president.
Secretary Kelly said he is an advocate for social media screening, and visa applicants who refuse to comply will be blocked from entering the U.S. On the travel ban, Kelly said he is confident the administration will prevail in court, offering lawmakers today no Plan B bill.
We'll watch it. Thank you, Catherine Harris, tonight here in Washington. There is an intriguing twist in the climate change controversy this evening. It has to do with data said to be manipulated by scientists, and that data was given to then President Obama and other world leaders at a critical moment. Doug McKelway looks at that tonight.
The accusations are explosive that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration intentionally manipulated data to hide a 12-year pause in global warming, and that the flawed study was a major influence in the 2015 Paris Climate Summit, where Western nations agreed to spend billions to reduce fossil fuel use. That, according to John Bates, who recently retired as a lead scientist of NOAA's National Climatic Data Center. His claim took center stage at a House hearing today entitled "Making the EPA Great Again."
We have every reason to be skeptical that our scientific community is maintaining its integrity.
In an exclusive interview Sunday with the Daily Mail, NOAA whistleblower Bates said, quote, "They had good data from buoys and they threw it out and corrected it by using the bad data from ships. You never change good data to agree with the bad, but that's what they did, so as to make it look as if the sea was warmer." In a blog post, Bates skewered the study's author, Tom Carl, that he, quote, "constantly had his thumb on the scale in the documentation, scientific choices, and release of data sets, all to discredit the notion of a global warming hiatus." The CEO of the American Association for the Advancement of Science today defended the NOAA study and said that Bates' whistleblowing is overblown. The statement, NOAA said, quote, "it stands behind its world-class scientists, but takes the allegations seriously and, quote, will review the matter appropriately." Critics note climate research today is almost entirely funded by the government.
A number of scientists have come to me telling me that where before a certain time period they were receiving government research contracts, afterwards, after it became clear they didn't agree with the CO2 theory, no more contracts.
In a statement late today to Fox News, Bates said his whistleblowing was not based on any personal feud, but is focused, quote, on concerns he raised and the opportunity they will be addressed. Bill?
Thank you, Doug. Doug McKelway in Washington with us tonight. We're watching a breaking story out of Iran as well this evening. Seems the Iranians have removed a ballistic missile from a launch pad. Jennifer Griffin at the Pentagon now with exclusive new satellite images this evening.
U.S. officials have been monitoring this launch pad since Iran launched a medium-range ballistic missile from it over a week ago. New satellite images obtained by Fox News from a private satellite company show a flurry of activity at the launch pad 140 miles east of Tehran in the wake of that missile test on January 29th. That launch prompted an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council, and a day later, the White House issued a strong warning.
As of today, we are officially putting Iran on notice.
This image from February 3rd, the same day that the U.S. Treasury announced new sanctions against 13 Iranian individuals and 12 Iranian companies in response to the missile test, shows over the course of 5 days, Iran quickly cleaned up the site and prepared another missile on the same launch pad at Semnan. U.S. officials tell Fox News the missile now has been removed from the launch pad. It's a surprising about-face, and the motives are not clear. The ImageSat International photos, verified by U.S. officials, shows Iran prepared to launch a Safir missile, which is used to put a satellite into space. The Pentagon is concerned because this missile uses the same components as those needed for an intercontinental ballistic missile. The Safir is similar to a North Korean Nodong missile.
President Trump has severely criticized the various agreements reached between Iran and the Obama administration, as well as the United Nations, as being weak and ineffective. Instead of being thankful to the United States in these agreements, Iran is now feeling emboldened.
Today, Iran's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, spoke publicly for the first time since President Trump took office.
He says be thankful. No, we are not thankful at all. Why should we be thankful? For sanctions? For breeding the Islamic State? For setting fire to the region? They have set fire to Syria. They have set fire to Iraq. Why should we be thankful?
And while it's not clear why Iran moved that missile from the launch pad, experts say it could be a technical problem, or perhaps Iran is reacting to the new sanctions from Washington. Bill?
Jennifer Griffin will watch that. Thanks from the Pentagon there. The president's travel ban executive order goes to court. Arguments now proceeding, and we'll talk about that with the panel after a short break. And as we go to break, the states are now making their case, taking questions from the judges. They get 30 minutes as well, so have a listen to their case for a moment, then the panel will break it down next.
Quite so much time on this. And the judge, I'm sure.
Time today as you want, but I'd suggest that this might not be the topic that's most important. But
fair enough, Your Honor. I would just say mandamus. The only point I'd make is that mandamus does allow review. It's just an extremely strict standard. And the important point also is that if the court treats this as an appealable order, then that's what the ultimate appeal of the ultimate ruling will be of. Whereas if the court properly treats this as a mandamus decision and sends it back to the district court will have the opportunity to enter a more full preliminary injunction when the district court understands that that's what it's doing, when that's its intent. And that will be what the court can ultimately review, as opposed to reviewing what the court clearly intended to be a temporary restraining order.
Yes, Judge Canby, in your view, if we left this order in place, would there then be a preliminary injunction hearing in the district court?
Absolutely, Your Honor. Absolutely. The parties have agreed to a briefing schedule. The preliminary injunction motion will be fully briefed by a week from Friday. I'm confident that Judge Robart will schedule a hearing and rule quickly after that. I'd also point out that the 14-day limit is for ex parte temporary restraining orders by its text. This one. No.
So a moment ago, we were listening to the ongoing arguments being made in San Francisco. I want to drop in a moment here. We picked a section of the government's case where the judge is asking a question and the attorneys from the Justice Department are answering that. Just dip in here and try and listen to the key aspect of the risk involved on behalf of the Trump White House.
Is there any reason for us to think that there's a real risk, or that circumstances have changed such that there would be a real risk if existing procedures weren't allowed to stay in place while the new administration conducts its review?
Well, the president determined that there was a real risk. That's why the president determined that the best course was a temporary, it's a short halt in entry for 90 days while these procedures are looked at.
So that is, in essence, the crux of the argument they're debating there in San Francisco. It's ongoing there by telephone, nonetheless. I want to bring in our panel right now. Tom Rogan, columnist for the National Review and Opportunity Lives, and Mara Liasson, national political correspondent of National Public Radio, editor-in-chief of LifeSet, Laura Ingraham, and syndicated columnist Charles Krauthammer. Good evening to all of you tonight. So you were all listening. It's ongoing. Laura, can the government win here?
It's going to be hard at the Ninth Circuit. The government should win. And a couple thoughts after listening to the early part of this oral argument. Number one, it's not easy to do an oral argument on the phone. Usually in cases this important, you'll do in the presence of the judge's appearance, argue the case. It's a little harder on the phone where you have the pauses and then the second time delay. That's just a little bit of an odd note. The thing that I really noticed is how ill-suited judges are to sit in judgment of foreign policy or national security issues, which is what they're doing here when they really examine the question of standing and the question of whether there is a rationale for this particular executive order. The statutes and the issue of sovereign immunity, they're very clear that the president has the authority in this issue. You have this Justice Department lawyer who's a career lawyer. He's been at the Justice Department for a long time. But he's not one of Trump's guys. I mean, he's like the third person that was selected because the other two had to recuse themselves because their old law firm is involved in the case. So this circuit is, as Charles has said last night and many nights before, is most reversed in the country by the Supreme Court. And tonight they sounded a lot more like ideologues than they did like justices to me, and knowing the facts of this case.
Tom, based on what you've heard, what do you think?
Well, I agree that if you look at the precedents of constitutional law, there is a clear inclination to provide the executive with all possible doubt as it pertains, as cases pertain to national security. That, Article 2, Section 2, the president is the commander-in-chief. But I think I agree with Laura in the sense that you listen to the arguments. I was actually surprised, even though the Ninth Circuit is known for this reputation, I was surprised but quite how emotionally vested the tenor of the questioning seemed to be. And of course, it's by telephone, so you don't see the body language. But look, I think the government President Trump has a challenge on his hands.
You're suggesting the question's more aggressive than you expected.
Well, but the nature of the questioning, that in terms of, there seemed to be a sort of idea that some of the precedents on the notion of executive power on national security doesn't exist.
Mark, I just want to go back to the piece of sound we just heard there. I mean, you heard the attorney for the Justice Department. The president determined there was a real risk here. And the law has always cited going back to the early 1950s with the commander-in-chief.
Right. So it's interesting. The two areas that Donald Trump cares most about, trade and immigration, happen to be the two things that the president has the most control over. And here he's exercising his control. This is kind of inning number one in what's going to be a very long fight. It will go to the Supreme Court, and there's going to be issues of executive power. And then there's going to be the question of whether this is a religious test or not. They haven't gotten into that yet. But this is an area where traditionally the president gets a lot of deference. He says there was some kind of imminent risk if we continue to let people in, even under our current system of what the Obama administration would have said was pretty extreme
national
vetting.
Security. In a moment here, I'm going to play another clip, the closing argument that the attorney for the Justice Department made. But Charles, you were listening, and granted it wasn't the full context of the states making their case, but you thought the attorney for the Justice Department was having a tough time.
I'm not sure he was top of his class way back in law school. And he was not. I mean, if you're going to do this, you really have to be prepared with answers. Clearly wasn't. But I must say I was surprised. We only heard the first half, meaning the presentation of the case on behalf of the federal government. And I found that the three judges were extremely aggressive. Now, it could be, having not heard the second half, which would be the questioning of the state the state attorneys, that they would be equally aggressive. I just don't know. But from the tone of the questioning, it looks as if the judges were extremely inclined to maintain the stay by the district court. We will know. I mean, we're in the middle of this.
Yeah, we are.
We're talking about an event that is unfolding as we speak. So it's necessarily rather speculative. But that was a pretty hostile bench they were, the government, the federal government, was facing. And I'm not sure that it was appropriate. What they were essentially arguing was the merits of the case. And I think they were sort of doing what is not in their purview. They're supposed to judge whether or not the president exceeded his authority. It's a very hard case to make, but they probably will find that he did.
Laura, listen to the final clip here, okay, and I'll get you to comment on this from a moment ago.
I would strongly encourage the court, even if it has concerns with the government's position, that it immediately stay the portion of the injunction that applies outside the boundaries of the U.S. And extends beyond people who are in the U.S. or who have been in the U.S. Thank you.
It's a narrow issue when it comes down to it. Do the states have the right to bring the case or not?
That goes right to the question, which I think the lawyer for the Justice Department didn't raise early enough. Do foreigners living in foreign countries have a constitutional right to come into the United States? And do states have the standing to bring cases? Really, what they're doing is essentially bringing it on their behalf. They claim that there's irreparable injury to the states if this executive order is allowed to be instituted and continues. But that's just a real leap. But do foreigners have a constitutional right to enter the United States? That's a whole separate question. But I think the answer answer to that is no.
And here's how they made that case on
Yeah.
behalf of the state of Washington a moment ago.
It was the executive order itself that caused irreparable harm to our states, to Washington and Minnesota and our residents, and to many other states and people, as described in the many amicus briefs that have been filed. So of course, we believe that the federal government has shown no irreparable harm from reinstating the status quo prior to the executive order.
You had technology companies in the state of Washington too saying that they could not access their employees, and that may or may not be the case, but how do you then balance that with a national security interest?
Well, we are told national security usually trumps that, and we'll see if they do that. But, you know, there's two things going on here. One is, you say the Ninth Circuit is a kind of more liberal bench, but those judges are human beings. And what I wonder is, after you've had a president attack a judge and say, if something bad happens, blame it on him and the entire court system, I wonder how much that affects these judges.
They're not doing their job, and they're actually acting unethically if they allow that to cloud their decision making. That's not what a judge is supposed to do. They're supposed to look at the statute, the Constitution, and the facts at hand without regard.
I'm just raising the question whether it affects them.
But Laura, you believe this court will send it back to the state of Washington. The law stands.
They're not going to lift the stay that the district court put on it. This will go back to the district court, perhaps to argue on the merits. They will file immediately at the Supreme Court, the U.S. government, and Lord knows what's going to happen at the court with perhaps 4-4 there.
If that is the case, then it's ongoing,
yes,
as the arguments are ongoing in the state of Washington. So how did the president react to all this today? In a moment, we will tell you what he had to say, and also as we listen, we'll bring you headlines from San Francisco by way of telephone as that case continues. More at the panel after this.
ISIS said, we are going to infiltrate the United States and other countries through the migration. And then we're not allowed to be tough on the people coming in? Explain that one. So we'll see what happens. We have a big court case. We're well represented. And we're going to see what happens.
Is it going to go to the Supreme Court, you think?
Good. I mean, we'll see. Hopefully it doesn't have to. It's common sense. You know, some things are law, and I'm all in favor of that. And some things are common sense. This is common sense.
Now, back with the panel. That was President Trump earlier today at the White House. And welcome back to all of you. Tom, explain that one.
Well, look, I think a lot of people have talked about here that Trump is simply trying to fulfill a campaign pledge. Whatever our opinions on the refugee ban, or whatever you call it, I think it's a bad strategy, a bad idea. I think what's going on here, actually, where the president says it's common sense, is the presidential daily brief. The level of detail that the FBI, specifically, we're talking about domestic operations, will go into if the consumer, the president in this case, wants them to, is enough to alarm anyone. That's why presidents' hairs go grey. And I think President Trump reading that and seeing the national security context, that to some degree you could make the argument should be managed in a better way than this refugee ban, as he sees it, simply, again, you put up the protective environment because he doesn't want to deal with that risk.
In that daily brief, you have failed states. Yemen, Syria, been at war 5.5 years. Libya. Charles, if you were to take that argument and rewind it 5 days ago and lead with, I'm going to tell you why this is common sense, would we be where we are tonight?
I think what we're seeing is the kind of kabuki that we do as a way to make ourselves think that we are safer from terrorism. Anybody gone on an airplane and watched as the TSA strip searches 80-year-old grandmothers understands that this is 90% psychological and useless. There are a lot of sources of terrorism. Of the whole list, probably at the bottom, is the idea of infiltration from these states. These are 7 states in 15 years since 9/11. There hasn't been a single murder of an American by a national of these countries. I'm not against tightening the vetting. We should. But I think it was unnecessary to order an immediate suspension for 90 days as if there was an imminent threat that hordes of Yemenis and Somalis were about to board airplanes and attack the United States. That's what caused the disruption. That's what caused the chaos. And that's what caused those scenes of very innocent-looking people, doctors, students, grandmas being separated and not allowed into the country, which has hurt the administration's argument. These people don't look like terrorists. And the numbers have shown it. The public opinion polls show that whereas in November the majority were against admission of Syrian refugees, that has now flipped. And I think it's a direct result of the fact that this was an unnecessary overshoot. Yes, tighten up the vetting, but there was no reason to suspend the visits of people who were already in the air.
Oh, lesson learned, perhaps, in the end, is that, Mara?
Well, you know, the other thing that I think that the administration might be risking is if there is a terrorist attack and it's from a U.S. citizen, from someone from a country that's not on that list, from some self-radicalized person, you know, he has now focused so much on these 7 countries. As Charles said, no recent terrorist attack has been from a person in these countries. What's going to happen when it comes from somewhere else?
Well, that question, Laura, some of that came up today. John Kelly, the new Department of Homeland Security Secretary, made his first public appearance after being sworn in. And he put it on his own back when he said the following today from the Hill.
We knew it was going to be released that day. The desire was to get it out. So that was the thinking. In retrospect, I should have, this is all on me, by the way, I should have delayed it just a bit so that I could talk to members of Congress, particularly the leadership of committees like this, to prepare them for what was coming.
I think that line, "This is all on me," by the way, is something that everybody heard.
Well, you don't hear
and
that
said,
much
"Whoa."
in Washington, and it's nice to hear that, frankly. And he's a stellar individual and a stellar cabinet member. But I think the thing that we have to remember here is we didn't have anyone slitting stewardesses and pilots' throats with box cutters before that happened. I'm not saying someone was going to rush in from Yemen, next week if we didn't have this review. But the idea that judges, unelected judges in Seattle and San Francisco are able to change U.S. Immigration policy that is in the president's purview is really what we're talking about. You can question the rollout. I certainly have. You can question the merits of it. That's fine. But as to this legal issue that we're seeing right now, this is a dangerous place. If the executive branch does not preserve its separation of powers from the judiciary and have that ability to make these calls, then we're going to have a lot of, Monday morning quarterbacks.
Does anyone here not think this goes to the Supreme Court here?
Look, I agree with you entirely, but there's a difference between legal and wise. I think there is no question that the judge in Washington was wrong in not allowing this to go through and in staying it, because he made no argument in his brief that this was illegal. He simply asserted it.
Charles, does this go to the Supreme Court here in Washington?
Oh, yes,
it does.
I think the Ninth is going to uphold the stay, and it'll have to end up in the Supreme Court.
Okay, let's leave it there, okay? Thanks to all of you tonight. Thanks for watching tonight. I'm Bill Hemmer. Good night from Washington. The first 100 days with Martha MacCallum comes your way next.